I'm Lauren Russell, Assistant Director at the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics. Part of our mission is to focus on a poetics of engagement in relation to this historic moment and with an eye toward moments to come. The work of Julie Patton and Tyrone Williams suggests two urgent but very different approaches to cultivating a poetics of engagement. In an era when there is much pressure for poets of color to perform identity in ways that are legible or palatable to mainstream and often predominantly white audiences, the experimental practices of Patton and Williams resist such easy consumption or reward. As a self-described poet, composer, performer, and permacultarist, Julie Patton's work spans genres and mediums, including sketches that serve as vocal scores for performances and publications she views as temporary, site-specific installations. Since the 1980s, she has maintained an apartment building in Cleveland as an ongoing art project, described in an article in Cleveland Magazine as part residence, part community center, part arts incubator. It morphs and reforms, harmonizing with the artistic needs of whomever has taken up residence. Or, as Patton said at the And Now Festival for Innovative Writing earlier this month, the building is her best book. It is also a political project. In the Cleveland Magazine article, Patton tells the reporter, "There's more than one way to be political in the world. You can be political in a community by creating artist space, like my mom did, the artist Virgie Azelle Patton, or by extending education through the arts like she did." For Tyrone Williams, politics is often a question of form. In an interview in CAAAPP Online a decade ago, Williams wrote, "I think of my own work as specifically avant-garde, which is to say it is informed by experimentation with a specific purpose, one that is largely political, to defamiliarize, retool, reimagine the languages and lives with which, through which, we struggle. To change the world and our actions in it, we might have to radically reimagine and reconstruct our relationships to language and history, which are fundamentally ideological. Williams' work may be informed by the language poet's desire to disrupt normative modes of meaning-making by drawing attention to how language functions in service to power. But as my Studio in African American Poetry and Poetics class has discussed over the last few weeks, Williams' work goes beyond that with an urgent, expansive poetics mapped across a dense canvas of history and memory that compels readers to grapple with questions of racism and white supremacy, colonialism, and nation building throughout history and into the present day. I'm going to introduce Tyrone Williams, who will read first. Then CAAPP Director Lundy Martin will introduce Julie Patton, who will be accompanied by jazz guitarist Paul Van Kuren. And a moderated discussion will follow. Also, please don't miss Julie and Tyrone's hands-on community workshop tomorrow evening at the Ally Studios. And there are limited edition poet trading cards with their faces on them that have the details on the back at the table in the front. Tyrone Williams teaches literature and theory at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. He is the author of several chapbooks and 6 books of poetry: CC on Spec, The Hero Project of the Century, Adventures of Pi, Howl, and As Is. A limited edition art project, Trump Lowell, am I pronouncing that right? Was published by Hostel Books in 2017. He and Jean Huving edited the anthology Inciting Poetics 2019. Last week, my class finished up a 2-part discussion of Williams' 2011 collection, Howl. I chose that book for its formal and thematic ambitiousness, its scale, and the sheer range of possibilities Williams brings to the page. In the notes, he writes that inaccurate newspaper reports of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing situated one of the bombers near Howell, Michigan. With this as its seed, the book spins into a larger project excavating the history of Howell and also the larger American projects of colonialism and nation building the lineage or landscape from which right-wing domestic terrorists spring. That landscape is vast and versatile, as evoked through the range of forms, approaches, and disciplines Williams brings to it. He mines and mutates histories of Powell and other cities, and a larger trajectory of US expansionism, engages Lacan's philosophy and Hogarth's woodcuts, uses game theory to create graphic poems that reference simultaneously a racist British pub game and an abolitionist children's book, projects racial and class tensions upon an equine canvas through an imagined interview with a mine pony, who subsequently appears as an ill-fated talk show host, and takes the science of DNA and RNA to debunk the myth of the US culture as fundamentally Western European in origin. As Williams writes in a note in the online magazine Intervales, where some of these poems first appeared, the culture that was brought over did not arrive unchanged by the voyages. The experiences at sea, however uneventful, had to alter, mutate, however minutely, that culture. The poems in this section follow DNA and RNA sequences as a map or constraint, utilizing only words that begin with those letters, though the words come from languages from across the globe. And some biologist poets in my class were even able to connect content in some of the poems to the particular DNA or RNA sequence named. Through serious play, Williams' work exceeds every parameter of language, medium, form, and genre to expand the possibility for how a poem knows, partly by calling the reader's attention to all the things it and we can never know, and the many layers of lost, suppressed, distorted, and reframed histories on which all our operating assumptions sit. The construction of history is at the heart of Williams' 2008 book on Spec, which is directly concerned with Blackness, but with Blackness examined through histories that are interrupted, interrogated, recontextualized, tweaked, obstructed, by various means troubled. In it, Williams intersperses Moby Dick references with the biography of Thomas Green Bethune, a blind piano prodigy born in slavery, whose former owners profited from his talents for decades after emancipation. Williams remembers Negro Tom, 1710 through 1790, otherwise known as Thomas Fuller, an enslaved genius who became well known as a mathematician. But Williams tells this story in two columns, with the right-hand column devoted to Fuller's mathematical prowess, while the left-hand column complicates that narrative with quotes from the time that refer to Fuller as someone's property or someone else's tool. The poem Brer R.G. is a 5-scene play in which an act of police violence occurs but is never named. If On Spec's complicated historical reckoning disrupts the expectation of proceeding linearly from A to Z, Williams' 2018 book, As Is, does so in the very title. In it, Williams confronts a climate of US xenophobia and Islamophobia by situating his excavating poetics in the ancient and contemporary Middle East, but still not so far from US nation building, as Captain John Smith of Jamestown fame makes a sudden epistolary appearance remarking, "What is at issue is neither the events nor their sequence, but only the question of interpretation, how these markers are to be held, or if you will, published as history." And what is the history we are writing now? In October of 2016, Tyrone Williams received a general call for work from Hostile Books, a collective of writers invested in the exploration of strategies for complicating or otherwise making perilous, hazardous, or toxic the activity of readership. 4 days after the November election, he responded with a proposal: 52 crushed tissue boxes containing tissues marked with epithets directed at Donald Trump. The irony being that most of the epithets involve serious wordplay that would likely be lost on the president. Williams called this project Trump Lowell after the art technique that creates the optical illusion of 3 dimensions. I obtained a copy for the CAAPP library, and last week I invited my class to pass around the box and pull out the tissues one by one. Irregular mouth movements, wasp same as it ever wasp, more chickens, more roosts, and he who must bay. With the impeachment inquiry underway, I want to know if there is another iteration, a reimagination, or a recalibration once the illusion ends. I am still searching for the antonym for Trump Lowell, which Williams' work has shown me even the future histories will not know. It is my great honor to welcome Tyrone Williams.
Thanks, Lauren. That was great. I think you covered it all. I also want to thank Don, Trevor, and other people who were involved with bringing me and Julie here. For me, at least, one of the best parts of this has been having time this past weekend to get to know Paul and Julie in a way that we hadn't gotten to know each other before. So it's been a wonderful experience. So I want to thank everyone involved with that. I'm going to read, and I've got a clock here so I can keep track of my time. I'm just going to read a little bit from As Is and then some new points. This poem is called Baraka, and that wasn't a stumble, that's the way it's spelled, Barake. Take a seat, says B to B, the flat plane of instruction, a tier above the floor of worship. Though from a bird's nest swaying side to side with prejudice, the shore is both the start and end of water, then land. And every seat's an element if one envisions another seat nearby, one with backing, and so a chair. Or just a seat, in fact, or stoop reduced to just a seat. In brief, a seat that's only a step not taken, one's feet planted firmly on ground. Moreover, B and B beside each other seem to themselves to typify the difference between floor and tier as one of scale, and scale, scaffold. B flat and not sums up in human music, shifting earth, solid states dissolving into middle stages. 2, because and despite the dark ages of Ahalaya, slow and fast-moving waters deposit erosion, and meander means down, south, and sideways blues impulse, if not the blues of the current serpentine heresies, the play of eddies and backwaters. Nothing escapes the black holes of Congo Square and Mecca but the breakdances of the prophets and the Amish parody of whirling dervishes. The Gregorian call to prayer frees jazz to over sky, and under Burqa, the middle left to board 3, new arc. To stand in short behind a throne as nomadic camels kneel into neighbors and contagion marked as neighborhood takes root, and roots beget rumors of trunks at first, the trunk at last becomes that bottom tree. To return to forests hidden from the eye is thus to see invisible ink streaming across a scroll of upheaval, branches as the upper promise of roots. And stars cast as site-specific installations mean jihadist texts v. jihadist contexts. B, says B, rising to his feet. Time to step off, and off he goes, a tangent to the scaffold and its ground, a third vector of many ways, mass crusader, the hijab in his wake, a repurposed cape. Ahalaya, after Thoth. Blue, green, gray, water footprints in profile point in one direction, in print right east, heel stride away, tamp down point step over non-point left-handedness. Basin groundwaters, the lake of books burns forever. Thought, intelligence, knowledge, wisdom, logic, reason, measure, writing, magic secrets, ibis and baboon-headed judge and court stenographer weigh and record the souls on file, petroglyphs of underground petroleum deposits, Placemakers make way for the wayfarers of the desert, sail across the sands, all thanks to Ra, steady at their backs, billowing chests, pull out mobiles, click on trees, the anime of life, save as oars. So this particular poem is called, well, the acronym is ADAM, and you'll see what that stands for. It's a library term, actually. Acquisition. The political stances of the oceans, a polis sans people, are a function of their distances from the landlocked fulcrum and are measured per battery of spoken prepositions, e.g., to, for, at. Development. Burned by the braille performances of a blind son, Ito Chuda, one of the worst architects, deploys a red cloud, his umbrella in Zeppelin, to carry him over the Ganges to tarry on the Bosphorus. Access. A shrine, a university gate, ways to, not of, the gods pouring out red hadith as they pass overhead and below on their ways to other poly, verses. Management. Dead hand control means a legible acronym of irrecoverable or non-existent knowledge. So these are some newer poems. In no particular order, as they say. There is a misery so great it overwhelms, washes out the carbon print of an uncut diamond, congealed excrement, arrested stall, a grief-lacerated spirit, a house rent asunder into two reverse mirrors, the back of God, the back of a sky-diving angel, the rim of a trumpet blocked by the back of the head of a trumpet player, a death that cheats itself, a mind expelled from the brain by the brain, an echo that never returns as the herd again, unspoken stutter, quarantine arpeggio, a solitude enforced by fellow shipwreck. It's messianic time. Dishonored and so honored anonymity and labor among the meddling crowds of mowed lawns, raked leaves and shoveled snow, our tiaras caught in thickets of crowns, try to free themselves by yanks, by twists, by turns, and so widen, sliding sideways down the great chain link, right to right until waist level, shrink into money belts, strapping us, the post-troubadours, in and put me in coach restraints. Yes, we post up, push back, credit cards cutting snow into high and runway lines, ticker tape collated into white stripes, traffic control, serial readers. And when the money belts are finally unfastened, they drop away, impotent snakes no longer swallowing their own tails. What awaits us outside our uncles, Sam, Tom, etc., cabin doors is never the future, just tomorrow, as we step off, step down from our plane, step out of our pants, step into the rings, nay tiaras by way of our rust belts, lace up the poems, await posed bells. Easy Pieces, or the History of the American Century. 1, from downtown. To nothing but net, your inner suburb. 2, post up. To bank a shot from the slot is not to not swish, but rattle the rim a little before. 3, in the paint. To get around the 7-foot center, 10 feet tall, when his arms fly up like a drawbridge or a man robbed at gunpoint, duck, dribble by and before momentum stumbles to the parquet, lay it, the better die of a pair of dice, up, if not in. Mouthpiece. Video killed the radio star of wonder as disasters wander, white the noise of many colors, turning coats to the painted over painting hanging from a cloud of hooks, the shell museum of the spheres, an old app before any were apt to support a failing CPU. Mortuary rituals underwrite liturgical release for civic statues, raising canes, shortwave blasts, exilic static. From the red planet vanishing point of voiceover veneration, break paint, repairs to the study, death no mo, sick. Aline. Bias of correction, foundation angles toward the proximity of against, as if a house and home destabilize, exchange clothes. A room slides off the shoulder, a skirt slammed shut, jams traffic. And still the unabated, if incremental, slips in and out as weather permits. The company car as a cart, clockwise in reverse, a cartridge cartwheels, a rearview mirror shatters, shards left. Not only the non-size left for the sighting too is nothing other than a frame descending with the framed. Look back up at night on earth, call the blood spots lights, and lights the splatter patterns of coins dropped on a palm and called change. At 10, you ate. The little scream bee be like bee stings, shriek, so to speak, or bellwether clang or dumbbell buoy, waitlisted bottom, feedback screech, roly-poly rope a depth charge, concussive undercut by uppercut, a hole in the wall, a horn in the hand, beast drums to the bush, bop-sided head quarter notes scramble, strings up and down, stiff necks, nappy-headed wiped down with hairnets and lips pursed to croon. While black, do not stare back, talk, look too long, look away too fast as if you had something to hide or worse, conceal. Do not walk too slow, run at all, or run out of luck and run into a nightstick, chokehold, or worse, intercept a bullet. Do not speak unless spoken to or for by a court jester bleeding your dry and out for time served from the day you were born in the pen. Do not drive unless you put it in idle at a light turning green as red-blue lights light you up and shouts command. Don't move, move along, for you are the nothing else there is to see here. Weather as far. These beautiful dyings, russet, umber, blackening mud stains, oil deposits, snow, blankets, real estate divided, congeals residential, gauntlet of houses plus neighbors, furrowed browsers, frown down, blue-eyed windows, screenshots, crop hoodies, fit neighborhood watch, nays, track rough shed, nail, nigh. equals or. Blood grabs a coat, skinny dip thongs the street, scrapes the inside of the sky, samples primitive cumuli, eye for eye, take a stand, divided by take a knee, pre-pounce, crouch, post-aborted, hunker, down homes, down. Born on death row. There are so many ways to die of value before a lethal injection of happiness pursues its ends and ends the matter, a wake of itself. As the beautiful debris of wedding trains congeal into the bosom and the mouth instinct opens, no choice in the matter. Swallows cock the sky in gorgeous time travels God as a circulatory or nervous system in which kingdoms reign, orders rise, and raises seen before the cars turn their self-same backs to show diverse invisible faces, storied chips, bright as vacancy signs the wage workers, plus fixed salaried women working one hand free, hit me again, one nail to the velvet glove of a tabletop on its last legs. Dead, not dead. Trees don't get to walk away, say the works of Saul. Actually, I think that was, oh no, this is the last one, Ave Cain. When they found her amputated foot, we remembered who you might have been. Across the street, she stutter-stepped. He raised our hand as if to wave salute away. It went on his way, as if to call on someone else, then stopped, turned. I turned too late to see them turn, failed to fall. Crutch got in the way. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. That was amazing. The last time Tyrone and I saw each other, it was like 10 years ago or something. You were giving a lecture, I think, though. So thank you very much. Thanks, Lauren Russell, for curating tonight's event. There's an entire week of events involving Tyrone and Julie. So I invite you all to attend those as well. I also want to thank the Humanities Center for, did you already thank the Humanities Center maybe for co-sponsoring a portion of the week, and the Dietrich School and the Dietrich Foundation, because that's where all of our money comes from. And then I also want to say that just to everyone here that this evening is it's an hour and a half, and the question and answer is a part of that. It gives you a chance to hear the artists talk about their work in a more relaxed way, and for you to ask questions too about anything really that's on your mind if you have them. So that said, I will introduce Julie Patton. In my preparation for writing this introduction of Julie Patton, I found myself thinking about some unlikely helpers. I was thinking about Susan Sontag, and I was thinking about the phenomenologist Edmund Husserl. Why did these folks occur to me as I visited Julie Patton's unique and ranging body of work? The Husserl came to me in a waking dream. I had not read The Idea of Phenomenology for some years, really since graduate school, but recall him positing some antagonistic relationship between the rules of logic and intuition and inference in favor of the latter. And usually when we think about intuition and inference, it's kind of designated into some, disparaging category of the feminine, but in this case, it was elevated as a way of making sense of the world and of phenomena. So it was my way in, really, to thinking about the power of the relational, what is relevant in art making, especially as it regards Julie Patton, to me seems to be the relational. And I guess what I mean by that is that there doesn't appear to be a distinction between the visual art, which often involves words, the poems, which are often shaped as if written on canvas, and the performance, sound work, all involve some level of improvisation, attention to the textures of language and meaning making in ways that I think we rarely think about. They also involve a deep playfulness, which I really admire. Julie herself once wrote, "I seldom look before I leap, I just go. And I go on paper sheets and stage, performing readings as writings, living, breathing compensations, and writings as legible performance scores." I love that. I'm a person who does the opposite. I kind of think too much, And so I admire that so much, and I admire what it produces. I admire what it produces, too, because she's also a witness bearer. So it's not in the abstract. She's actually paying attention to the world around her and experience and phenomena. The poem titled Time Squared, for example, is, in Erica Hunt's words, a poetic libretto based on the life of Virgie Ezell Patton, who was born in 1928 and passed in 2017. She was a Cleveland-based painter and artist and the mother of Julie Patton, who Hunt reads as heroic. Akin, she says, to Shiva, her dozen arms cajoling the impossible from the predictable and squaring, even cubing time. She goes on to say that what Patton further does is bring in the tricksterish, Janus double-handed and double-jointed, pairing image and text composed of her mother's correspondences, newly composed images, collage, correspondence theories, and chimera. What interests and excites me when it comes to Julie's work is its tactile quality, its materialness, even as it refuses materiality. In these relations between artistic approaches as they overlap and intersect, indeed refuse to be disentangled from each other, is the kind of utterance that, to me, feels like life, as if life and art cannot be disentangled. I know of no other poet artist who embodies and lives art as Julie does. This is why I thought of Sontag, I guess, because of the brilliance driving the mechanism behind the work. Although it's different, I guess I was also reading the Sontag biography. And though personality-wise, I would imagine Julie Patton and Susan Sontag as opposites, I'm interested in artists and thinkers who have a seeming inability to not make things. Julie Patton, however, is what happens when an artist of consciousness makes things. She is a self-defined permaculturalist and writes in one artist statement the following: "Among other approaches in this vast encircling body of work, my sense of text as landscape and my expression or vision of nature as text, the book of nature unfolds. I keep flowing as I think on feet, ABC daring, blocks and box of projects later, making good on a promise I made to trees when I was a young budding poet, to not waste them, or the lives of birds due to the dioxin toxic paper making process." So I continue to research alternative ways of publishing or making my work public, from one one-of-a-kind limited editions to site-specific installations in welcoming literary journals, off the walls of pages to 3D spaces that function as books, into music gigs, displaying pen, den, din. That's from Julie. And I can think of no other artist who makes good on such a moral and ethical promise to our natural world and to all of us. Because she does this, however, it can be rare to encounter her work, and tonight we are the luckiest because we get to do so. So I'll read the formal bio now. Julie Patton is a sculptor of sound, image, and text. She is the founder of Let It Be Archives, a time-based living sculpture and earth conservation project. Her visual poetics take the form of found objects, assemblage, scrolls, extended texts, limited edition work, performances, ephemeral libraries, and site-specific installations. Patton bridges musical and literary improvisations and performances emphasizing collaborative in-the-moment compositions and otherworldly choreographs. Her noted womb, room, tomb installation honoring her mother was featured in the Front International Triennial in 2018. She is the author of Notes for Some Nominally Awake. Her book-length serial poem, B, is forthcoming from Tender Buttons Press. And she's performed at a number of venues and festivals all over the world, including the Stone Jazz Standard, Festival Internacional de Poesía in Colombia, the Kitchen La Béti Festival in Geneva in Switzerland. She is also a frequent collaborator with choreographers, poets, filmmakers, composers, including Nashit Waits, Abu Farman, Vinnie Burroughs, Ravi Coltrane, Henry Hills, Drew Gardner, Daria Fain, and Robert Kosick and Ann Waldman. She performs with the improvising guitarist Paul Van Kuren as the duo Cloud Flower, who will be joining us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Julie Patton. Thank you.
This weekend, Tyrone, I learned from all of you last week, and now I listened and somewhat participated in a workshop with that Lauren Russell together in Washington State. And so ever since then I've been thinking of poetry, poetry branching, neural divergencies itself, poetry as neural divergency. Poetry from the top. I am humbled always amid the brightness of people like you, and the intellectuals and writers and thinkers that have influenced me. And tonight I'll show something of someone else on the verge. Her name was Virgie. Ezel, Virgie, Ezel, Patton, and whole room too, the installation that Don just referred to. Modern poetry as an expression of fact, the landscape and the sense of home and indwelling, not a landscape of rape and violence, trying friendships to each other, openness and caring, Love and CARNG and UNITY of spirit. An invitation to call any place we go, home borderless, as it is in reality and not the schemes of a corporate community that is not a together, but an insatiable group of hungry, angry ghosts peeling away any sense of home. Their clumsiness hurts us. What we need to come together and away from their frightening poison position, to really be at home in this world. We found a dry tree and began to plant it. They came and tried to cut it down all around our bodies running away from home, bleeding and screaming. These kinds of accidents do not happen without a reason. They begin outside the hearts of people involved. Not a place of community, but a place of distraction. Not a place at all of being ourselves. Like curing light and death in you. Letters take words in trails. Figure L, anim L, fuss L, scrib L, looping in tails. Alphabet letter, else you utter, initial, sound, glitch, one note per nude, node L, doodle. Are we on the same page? Right angle to elements, bookworm, earthward, glowward, ink sworn to the letter IDL, bulbs, pins, mulch, mulch, too much, plain enough, exam, allergy, reaction to topic, paper, words, lyric, overreaching. L plus edge ability to look before you. Yes, pistel, petel, carpel, seatbelt, lingering with stick, figure L, epilogue. And the smarts of people not too smart, the road to hell, 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 hell. Not exactly dominated by humility, but tearing us. I didn't plan on making over a place. Figured this complex playing house with relative strangers, babysitting cats, milkweed, bolting riders, boilers, struts, old typewriters, and the bluestone bricks started falling. And the beautiful, 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 beautiful possibility emerged from nearby the watershed, sharing conglomerate, sacked in its budding, dwelling, tinkering alterity, improvising the what next of this first act. Should have seen the lake today. Water so still, as if sky needed a mirror to see itself. Birds ducking and diving off of a sudden encounter with themselves, took off from blue notes, inked in conversation, silhouette, a mother-daughter tit for tat, using blue to get black. What kind of blue you use? To get water, mama. Watercolor, or the color of water. Water, 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 as in wet blue. You could almost use cobalt blue pure. Except to vary the tones, ultramarine too. That's even darker. Yeah, but still, it's a truish hue. The blue you use depends on other colors in the painting. Yes, the rest of the picture determines which blue. Blue varies from moment to moment. Cerulean has a tinge of green. There are other colors I could use. Primary of all the blues. Most things I do seem to call for that kind of blue. Very true as a medium. It's a blue. You need a medium blue. I'm looking at that color on TV in the background. Why you crap at that paint and look at TV at the same time? You boo too blue. Because water at a distance gets darker or lighter, just as streets. Apply it to a proper blue cause. Yes, I do. I use that blue for figures. Apply it again to a proper blue. Cause yes, I do. All the time, especially black figures. I've done figures using blue for the undertones because dark skin, when you look at them, what people tend to have more green in their skin when you're painting them. And blacks more blue, but sometimes there's blue in their skin too. Also violet, a tinge of hue blue in their skin too. Juju blue and blues. Let's use blue to get black. It's what's that? Pale. What? People, I also see violet in both skin colors. Usually the light that falls on them, brown skin takes on a blue quality, always blue to me, bluish cast, sometimes a gray bluish, and in areas where light hits body, I emphasize it more. That's what makes it abstract, bluish. How you blew it, depending on the intensity of the light surrounding things. There's a violet blue that can come out. Sometimes I add a little bit of, when I use the blues, even if it's a mixed colors, I put a bit of black in it to bring it down, gray the blue, or blue the gray. Otherwise use orange. It's opposite for changing the blues to gray. The blues arrive at the right tone. They go after value. The darker you pit a bit of black or upper, don't have to be black. Don't pit a bit of black, I say that. So many variations of skin, all those earth colors, videos with the M, all the black figures, and this series evolving blue to bring out the contours and the highlight of all those figures. Definitely blue, using blue to get black. You know, I use blue to make certain kind of black, a black that's bluish, but anyway, if you make it black, you would use a deeper, 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 deeper ultramarine, perhaps see a richer black. Ultramarine, put blue in the black, use your deepest blues, then add burnt umber red to get you can even add purple dioxide. Is that a formula? I remember Tang June worked downtown at the police station. She used to get dispatchy descriptions by height cops describing this black man with maroon eyes. She used to hate that, but still, doesn't the color underneath matter? It depends on what you want to see through. The color beneath blue peeping through. Yellows perhaps. White. It's just a natural earth pigment. Natural. I mean, say neutral. Depending on the tone you want the blue to take on tone. It's a high or low-ish. Purple can be a blue, red, or even pinkish, reddish, violet, purple, like a background color for people. Violet or violent. Perps can be people too. Purple, a mixture and red and blue. So it's an extension of the blues bleeding through a pore. Trait, painted into a color. Rego, how you get white, use blue, take that blue over there. Color. Blueberries, blue corn, ships be nice to be trained by that blue menu. Bluefish, blackfish. Wish I could have sat here and enjoyed this delicious. So, what do you want to be, Mama? Plain text or italic? Okay. Oh, you have it. This is an aesthetic problem, one inherent in the nature of a conversation. Okay, so go ahead. Use different colors. Black, not black. Black. I remember the very day that word came to sit on my front porch, and the elders were like, who said you we were until we reach for a higher. So, in order to be that, we gotta agree black. All this admixture painted into you know where. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Paul Van Kuren on guitar. Julie, I was wondering if you just talk a little bit about what we just experienced. Because a lot of times we kind of, take for granted or something that we think we know and we don't. So I'm curious about what I estimate is that, these are intimate images, paintings by you and your mom and others that I'm not sure what text you were reading from, but sometimes it seemed, sometimes you were improvising. Sometimes it seemed you may have been reading from text not your own. I'm not sure. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I guess in today's parlance, they would call it a mashup. I write and I write and I write, and there are closets and boxes full of projects. But I tend not to read those things. Like, since I've been here, I just go places and I just collect impressions, but I just put them away. It seems like at this point I can only work in the moment in a collaboration with everyone present. And it's more of, it's like a meditation space to be in and to calm myself and to listen. And everything that went before, your voice, listening to Tyrone, especially that last line in that poem about change, goes into the mix. It's kind of like that Little Rascals episode when they're making a cake. Anybody ever see that? And they throw shoes in it, and and it goes, and it bursts through the oven door and goes boing, boing, boing. So, so that space that you're witnessing is comes out of the same, say, gap between being in control of my life and not. And I consider it an architext, because the best solution to contain my work and its diverse bodies and forms over decades is to put it in one building that is split between a left side and a right side, a private, recto, verso, public, binary, bound between an air shaft and that gap. And so everything kind of falls through the gaps, the clouds, the rains, the artwork. And so I've been working on saving this complex, along with Paul Van Kuren, who lives in the building, and other people who passed through over the years. So none of it was based on decisions. It's all an improvisation of working with available materials. I often consider that building a trauma ward, a refugee center. My friend Boo Farman says, make sanctuary, not art. So I guess that sanctuary was ahead of its curve. It refers to another sense of sanctuary in the 17th century. Wealthy women who ran huge manor houses in Europe had what were called closets, small spaces where they could be themselves and go wash away their sins, according to the men's, or meditate. And when I would come in and out of New York City trying to save my mother, whose house was foreclosed upon repeatedly since my father had passed, the opposite spectrum of wealth, a woman, a female artist with 6 kids, kind of trying to hold her space together, ended up in the end in this building. I don't know the destiny. It's hard to save artwork. And so I didn't realize what I was creating. Now I'm very upset with myself because it's kind of tied me to the Rust Belt and to Cleveland and to the neglect of any artist's work that cannot be categorized. It's lost, and we lose libraries every day. So I don't. That's the best I can answer that.
No, it was great. Actually, you kind of preempted my next question. I ask everyone who comes to CAAPP or through CAAPP a kind of similar question. And so Tyrone, you talk about your work in the kind of in the tradition of the avant-garde, and talked about. And Lauren was quoting from something that you wrote, I believe, talking about the thinking about the remaking of the world through the rearrangement, really, of rationales. You know, and a really explicit example of that, obviously, is the trompe-l'oeil, which I think is, I saw it on Lauren's desk, and I was like, what is this? Because it literally looks like a box that somebody, like, taped together, like, with reused, like, old cardboard, and then you look in, and there are all these, you know, as Lauren described, phrases on tissues. And so I guess I'm just hoping that you could just talk a little bit more about what brought you to that project, but also how it matters, I guess, in this particular moment. Because it's, you know, it's Trump, not the other Trump. Right.
Well, I think Lauren read the statement because we had to create a statement for the press itself about how it was generated, and you know, I don't know exactly. Well, as I said, it was serendipitous to a certain extent because, you know, that, you know, I was watching like everybody else the election results, and just a few days before that, I had gotten this invitation to create some sort of, you know, anything I wanted to do, weird project. And after the election, the sort of disappointment and shock. Why tissue boxes? I have no idea. I can't, recreate what I was thinking at that particular point. That made me think of that. But I just decided to get these 52 boxes of tissue boxes, which I had to actually order online. And in my office at work, every day I would place 2 or 3 of them on the ground and just crush them, which was sort of good therapy too, and in many ways, just crushing these tissue boxes. And then I would insert the epitaphs into them. But I have no idea what it means because, it's mail art, you know, to a certain extent, because I just mailed them out to, you know, people whose addresses I had, and completely forgot about it.
In a surprise way, or did you warn them?
No surprise. I didn't tell anyone what was coming. And in fact, at first I thought I would blow my nose on them, but I decided not to do that since these were my friends,
right?
You know, more or less.
Thank you. I'll turn to the audience, and then we'll come back here if we have more time. But is there a question in the audience? There, right there.
Thank you, and thank you both. That was a really fulfilling experience. I was wondering if, on the first hand, you could talk for each other and to each other maybe about your relationship to play. And I mean play as whether it's a priority in the work. If it's a priority, is it also a tool? And what would it be maybe a tool for or a tool against? And then on the other hand, I'm also thinking about impermanence and your relationship to impermanence. Julie, with kind of the precariousness of the materials, also like the experience being not really reproducible. And Tyrone, as far as, I guess, reading the work and how the words play along with each other and how colloquialism, you know, has its particular moments in a contemporary setting. Like, how do you think about how the words, how the meaning can be more or less impermanent as reading and misreading goes on, if that makes sense?
Thank you. Did you can hear that? Yeah.
Kind of a long question.
Sorry. There was a lot that I was really
The first part was
interested
about your relationship to play, right?
Yeah.
Right, play.
Yeah, and then there was a second part that had to do with, did you say impediments?
Impermanence.
Impermanence. Yeah.
Well, I know it's often described that way as you know, playing with language playing with words. And I guess on some levels that makes sense, though I have to say I don't necessarily always think of it, or actually most of the time I don't think of it as play. I think of it as my attempt to deal with, the world. And even the puns, are, they're funny. They're meant to be funny on some level, but they're also serious investigations about what counts as language. I'm old enough to inherit this notion that the English language is the language that we have to deform. By we, I mean African Americans, because it doesn't belong to us in the sense that we inherited it. We had to learn it and so forth in a way that wasn't true for the colonialists. It's more complicated than that, I realize, but I always think of that as not so much play as serious works of undoing. That's part of the way I think of it. Sometimes there's play in the sense there's, like Richard Pryor plays, as in, it's funny, but it's also deeply serious. If you know who Richard Pryor was, I guess I should explain that. He was a comedian. So.
We might have to send them to Google, like
right,
as
Google,
an assignment.
Right, exactly.
But it's a beautiful assignment to Google some Richard Pryor. Right. Yeah.
Someone once told me, or I heard, that in many indigenous communities, there was no word for work, and that during the time that I've spent hanging out in this edifice, which is 16,000 square feet, there's 6 suites. Each one is 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, and the attorney for the building wanted to attract investors because it was the condo craze before the market crashed to fix up the building and then sell the suites off. And it's there were 2 African American cooperative movements, one in the late 19th century and another one in the 40s. And all of these units on this park in Cleveland, Rockefeller Park, were purchased in the 40s by blacks. Langston Hughes' mother lived around the corner, and Larry Doby, who was what Jackie Robinson was to one league, Larry Doby was to the other, but he came from very, very interesting community. Russell Atkins was teaching poetry right at the corner of that block the night before the Glenville Rebellion started, which I witnessed from our house, which we had to flee because of the fires. And he's a very interesting poet who is still based in Cleveland. He's 93 years old. So there is a lot of history. So I told the attorney, well, you know what? It's unfortunate, this building has a condition that people who want shiny, brand new, antiseptic, hospital-looking housing that's currently the rage all over, they want something else. But being a recycler, born in a city in which the river burned, there were rivers that caught fire all the time, but the reason why the Cuyahoga River's burning became so prominent in the minds of Americans and the basis of Johnny Carson's jokes, he started with Cleveland jokes every day for 20 years, was because the first black mayor of America was elected in Cleveland. And so there were a lot of people, paparazzi and people who were around. And so they were, I guess, waiting to see how he would deal with this. So the modern environmental movement has very strong black roots, very, very, very strong. We're often cast as urban as opposed to rural, and then the rural is tainted with negative associations with land, but as the work of Austin Allen and his films, and this project sought to unearth these other connections. So as a child, it's not true what's being said about climate change. Don't believe the generation gap, because for indigenous communities, they've always been activists. So the word activist doesn't apply to people whose lives and lifestyles have been rooted with an awareness of conserving and maintaining the home of Earth in its home, where we live. So that project has all of the collages that you see. It's not art. I trip out when people say, oh, look at all this art, because they all fall apart and come back together and reposition, as you might have seen all around the building as new so-called trash comes in. So your question about impermanence, he left. Where did the gentleman? Oh, you're still there. Okay. I don't seek to hold on to anything. The only decisions that are made have to do with, I walk around with, I'm a super of that building when I'm in Cleveland. I have scissors in my pockets, or I tear things apart and I stick them on the wall and I run away and I come back, and then other trash, so-called trash, I don't believe there's anything, it's trash, and that's perhaps the point. So it's layers and layers of that happening. And Paul often says it's a living sculpture, because likewise, when an individual pops in, they influence the space, and it means somebody's breaking out dishes of food or running to the garden to get the herbs. And so I didn't like the world of, oh, let me write this BS so I can get a grant. This kind of plantation focus that I see so prevalent. It has nothing to do with being free. And so we decided we would only take what came to our door, what approached our doorstep. That serendipity means living with a kind of magic, but it's also true to my sense of growing up in a household and among, for some reason, the social life in Cleveland when growing up, was either walking through parks or woodlands or going to the lake or meditating. People get together in people's homes and sit with each other. There was a very strong value about that. I don't go around saying I'm a this or a that, but I can say for a long time I did study along with my mother and my sisters under particular teachers. I think that, often when we talk about the diaspora, we reach farther south across the Gulf and down to Cuba and Brazil to talk about certain African spiritual traditions, while these alternative spiritual traditions in the North have, and those people with links to them, have died and disappeared. I could name some of those things, but a lot of what's happening now was whispered. That's the thing that shocks me, is that one day, who reads the signs? So this is also about reading the signs, whether it's you popping in or you popping in or me popping out. And too many gunshots popping too. So that a lot of that work that happened had to do with me coming from the Lower East Side, where my own home was under assault. I spent 10 years in court. So in effect, it was house arrest. I couldn't leave, I couldn't work, I couldn't travel. I didn't do the things I used to do because I had to be in court every month, because Trump's friend, there's a PBS documentary about my land devil, not Lord, and that tore my life asunder. So that began the first tearing, because they kept, in New York, they did something called constructive demolition. And these are friends of Trump. And I was running around telling people there are all these Russians in my building. They tore up my whole building so I could see through the floor down to the bottom. And then these unspeakable characters would come through. That was the beginning of this. And those who were caught up in this tried to warn. Eventually, the Attorney General of the state of New York took our side, And I won't go into those details. So a lot of this has to do with homelessness. I'm still homeless. I don't live anywhere in that building. I go around with boxes and suitcases, and then I come here and I go there, and I'm in New York. But the cats are always there, and they rule.
I love how you were talking, like when Justin asked that question, the first word that came to me was liberation, and I was thinking about the relationship really between what we do in the process of making art. We sometimes call it play, even though it is serious, because like one has to kind of lift something from some part of their imaginations in order to produce it, right? And yeah, so thank you for that. We have time for one more question from the audience, if there is a question. It's always like the pressure on that last question. If I say it's the last question, nobody has one. If I hadn't said it was the last question, somebody would have a question.
I do want to say something about the work. The work becomes play within community. You know, that's where the play is really realized. Oh, go get this, go do this. So, yes. Many hands make light work is often attributed to the Amish. I'm Blamish or blemish, and but that saying there's an African saying that's at the root of that. I guess many cultures had a sense of the making poesis when you come together in forces and materials and human nature and nature. Here you go.
Well, so is it all about the work, Tyrone, or is there? Do you? So in some ways, I think that I want to just ask one more question about this notion of play or fun, or like where I think that we should, even as serious artists and theorists and people thinking about things and trying to make change, a lot of the time, and sometimes I think we get stuck in all of that labor, and we can't seem to liberate our bodies in a way and allow ourselves pleasure. Yes, dancing. What do you see?
There's definitely pleasure there. So in that sense of play, absolutely. And, that's almost a stereotype, the notion of the artist as someone who, first and foremost, is a child. I mean, that's for Freud and so forth, and continues to play, arrested development and all of that. So there's no question that's a part of it, too. And because you have to, in order to do it, since it's not as though the rewards are so wonderful out there. So if you aren't doing it for yourself, there aren't a lot of other, motives for doing. You have to. There is a degree of pleasure involved in that. So yeah, I can't deny that. That's an important element.
Last comment from Julie.
I play house, and house plays me. I'd say that we're all enslavers in some way, because the world is building. It's all on the backs of bodies that are moaning. I think there would be no justice until we all partake in that kind of labor and we switch jobs. Why these hierarchies? The person doing the maintenance work, yeah, I could work on your boiler if you want. The person doing the maintenance work has incredible skills and knowledge. We work with 80, 90-year-old tradespeople who have a wonderful, these skills will be lost. And they often join us because they like to hang at the dinner table, and they know we don't have any money, and so we fall in love with each other, and they help out, and they begin to play as we learn their labors of love and work and their skills and the depths. This is the Rust Belt from Buffalo to Pittsburgh, Youngstown, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago. This part of America is totally misunderstood, but it's very central to the story of this country. And I'm talking about the Rust Belt in particular. Work, labor, play, all these things cross over and get mixed up. The more they do, the better. The president of this college, he should get down on his knees and scrub this floor, because not until they, she, whoever they are, it knows what that is to do, how to put their body into it, vacuum these things, it should be all mixed up as I'm mixed up. Thank you.
Thank you to Julie and Tyrone and Paul. There is a book signing after this, and you can obviously have more conversation with our visiting artists in the hallway. Thank you again for coming.